Good morning. Welcome to January the 28th.
2024. And we're glad you're all with us this morning. Our topic this morning is the trouble with change. And since that was Bob's topic, he's starting out.
Well, I've decided that we're just going to stop changing things. From here on in, let's just all lock arms and keep things the way they are. It's interesting. I was thinking about the trouble with change. What's the trouble with change? Well, the trouble with change is that it always confronts us with something new, and that confronts us with anxiety that we often don't realize we have, which is around what if it doesn't work? What if I can't handle it? What if it's overwhelming? It's often not spoken, but change implies having to take a course of action that possibly you haven't taken in the past, or possibly you've taken in the past and it didn't work out. But more interesting than that is just about 20 minutes before we went on the air, I happened to be on the internet. Every now and then I'm on the internet, okay, most of the time. And I happened to see a study that said 70% of adults, this is done by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente, 70% of the adults, at least in this country that was surveyed, have suffered trauma and are suffering from some kind of trauma. And it's often a silent trauma. It could be family of origin trauma. It could be, not having HBO. All right, that's not really a trauma, but the traumas that people have experienced impacts in so many ways, health-wise, and our mental well-being. But it also then puts us in the position of being on guard and being prepared for something bad. We're always ready for having to defend ourselves if something should happen. And so in that defensive posture, we are often reactive to change rather than inviting it and looking forward to it and then participating in it. So what I wanted us to talk about today was shifting our position, the position we're seeing the world in, from one of fear to one of possibility, to one of grace, to one of joy, to one of light, to one of love, which is easier said than done. But what happens when you recognize that you are seeing the world from a place of fear? When you're seeing the world from a place of anxiety, of having to defend against possibly bad things happening, then when you see that, you can say, is that accurate? Is that true? And could I change my relationship with this thing called change, with this thing called now? And that's the first step in us having control over and even mastery over our own life. So we're no longer a reaction to life. We're a series of choice actions in life. We become the creator of our life rather than the reactor to what appears to be a life that's in front of us that we didn't have any control over. And that's it. Now I can go do something else.
Well, but I was thinking about with the change in the new year, of course, we're getting back into a political year again. And it's so easy to get into us versus them, which is a split. And we have, wars going on, a couple of wars going on, and
We
that's
always have that. That seems to be
us
necessary.
against them. And so I have some quotes from Ernest Holmes about the unity of God, the unity of good, he calls it. So I want to start by reading that, because whenever we feel like there's separation, we know the truth behind that is that really we're all one. So this is in the Science of Mind textbook, page 332. And Ernest Holmes says, Jesus prayed that all might come to see the unity of life. Quote, that they may be one, even as we are one, was his prayer as he neared the completion of his great work, speaking to his disciples. The prayer that enabled those closest to him to understand the unity of spirit, in which man clearly recognizes his oneness with his creator and with all creation. All mystics have sensed that we live in one life. Quote, in him we live and move and have our being, unquote. We're all very familiar with that quote. And then he says, the unity of good, which could also be said the unity of God, is a revelation of the greatest importance, for it teaches us that we are one with the whole and one with each other. The fatherhood of God and the actual brotherhood of man will be made apparent on earth to the degree that man realizes true unity. So that's a good reminder for us when we see what is apparent division and apparent separation and competitiveness. I have another quote from a Presbyterian minister called Ian Cummins, and he says, "We are not made to hold half our neighbors in contempt spiritually. We are not wired to feel hatred and mistrust toward each other. It's toxic to our souls. Beneath that anger is terrible loss. We want to be in relationship with each other. We're created for relationship. I don't mean that God created us and hoped that we would enjoy each other's company. I mean that God made us such that we are not whole and healthy unless we are bounded and bonded in human relationship, and we feel a part of the human family. We need to recognize the sacred worth of another, even when we disagree.
That's recognized by so many people, even the prison system. When you behave badly or behave in a way that violates whatever rules they have, what do? They isolate you. They separate you from your peers.
Yeah.
And as children, we were often separated from our parents when we did something that they didn't like. We were abandoned. We were told, go to your room, go someplace where we don't have to see you anymore.
Separate you from
Yeah,
others.
and so separation is a real anxiety that we have. And that separation, what Ernest Holmes is talking about, is it's actually not possible to be separated from source. And if we start looking at not being separated from source, and that source operates in and through all of us, we can't be separated from each other either.
Exactly. We can appear to have our differences and whatnot, but the truth is we're all connected. And it feels so much better to know that we're all connected instead of that we're adversaries. And so often, especially in political, if we have a two-party system like we do in our country, it so often gets to be us against them, or appears to be that way. Ken Wilber is a very enlightened spiritual leader, and he has this to say about that. He said, for individuals with whom we have fundamental different view of politics, our appropriate response is to feel not a gloating moral superiority, but truly deep compassion. Indeed, compassion is the only judgmental attitude we're allowed, the only one. I'm going to repeat that. He says, compassion is the only judgmental attitude we're allowed, the only one. And that started Bob and I off on a conversation last night about what we imagine people are feeling and needing and wanting in the party opposite from what we usually vote. And we really got off into a deep dialogue about how their concerns are valid, and how what they want is valid. And so
I mean, they're absolutely wrong, but I'm sorry.
Yeah. So it helps us realize we all just want what's good. So, but we still should vote for how we think is the best way to bring that about. But to do it without condemning the others.
Well, and so much of that comes from our own fear of being condemned. It comes from our own fear that we're not going to be accepted. And that has happened often enough to most of us that we approach people who are different and have a different philosophy or a different point of view with an anxiety, and it's a defensive posture without even thinking about it that often runs us. How can I stay out of trouble with these people? And that they're definitely wrong because they disagree with me, and we haven't talked enough to find out where there's agreement. So there's just disagreement. There's this unspoken anxiety. So it takes me back to the fear we have of loss, the fear we have of rejection, the fear we have of being annihilated at some level. I remember one time going to a church I had never been to before, and the minister said to me, "Have you been saved?" And I said, I don't know what that is. He said, "Well, then you're going to go to hell. You need to." And I thought, oh my God, I had no idea that hell was something that happened to people who weren't saved. I didn't know what saved was. But he also volunteered to save me there. And so I said, well, go ahead and do the saving thing, whatever that is, and I'll be okay with it if that'll help. And so he did the saving thing, and he said, "You're better now. You're going to go to heaven." And then about a month later, I went to a different church and the minister said, "Have you been saved?" And I said, "Yes, I was just last week or last month." And he said, "Where?" And I said, "Over there." And he said, "They're not, you're not saved." And I said, "Oh my God, I can't believe it." So what happens is that we have this anxiety that we can't quell when we feel ourselves separate from and defensive. And our posture is, I have to be right, or you have to be wrong, or I have to leave you because I can't deal with that disparity.
Indeed. So, what change do you find difficult? The trouble with change?
Uh,
We were talking last night about when music changed.
oh yeah, yeah. Actually, what's interesting, yeah, there's the music I grew up with, and then there's that other stuff other people listen to. And because they listen to it, they understand it. And because I don't listen to it, I don't understand it. Therefore, it's not really music, and it's not really very good. And I realized in our conversation last night how quickly I was judgmental simply because I refused to be exposed to something that I hadn't been exposed to that brought me comfort at the same time that I was being exposed to it. So and one of the things we discovered, and I've shared this with one of our members who has a blog dealing primarily with rock and roll music. And I thought, to me, rock and roll music was something that I hoped didn't last, wasn't going to last, it was never going to be in my life, and I knew it wasn't any good. And why wasn't it any good? Because I grew up in a generation before that where we had different music. We had folk music, which is very different, and classical music and jazz, but we didn't have this rock and roll thing. In the last 10 years, it's been interesting watching all of the documentaries on all of the groups that I didn't like and how much I've liked them. How much I realized that I was shut down from even considering them because of my own personal bias, because that would have been a change in my liking of music and my liking of, or my idea of what music is. And the problem with change is that as soon as we're confronted with it, it can literally rub up against a whole system of beliefs we have that make no sense, that actually are to our detriment. I would have to say that as a music lover, having ruled out whole groups of music was to my detriment.
And then you were confronted recently about rap music.
That's not music. Yeah, yeah. One of
That's
the,
another generation
yeah,
beyond their
I don't
rock
know
and
what they
roll.
call that. Yeah, and I mean, I have all of my. I don't like it because it's aggressive, it's hostile, it's dirty, it's nasty, it's sexist. It's I was talking to one of my clients who happens to be a rapper, and who was explaining to me that that is some of the rap, but not all of it. And I thought, well, I don't care about the rest of it then. If I don't like some of it, it's probably none of it's any good. It's so easy to wipe it out as a possibility. And basically what he was saying is that rap is poetry to rhythm. And you like poetry, don't you? I said, yes, I like some poetry, but not that poetry. And what I was clear about was that I had already made up my mind whether I was going to give it consideration or not. And then when I gave it, quote, consideration, it was token consideration. It wasn't real consideration. So giving consideration to a point of view that isn't ours, not as a token effort or as a gesture, but as a true, let me look into this, let me consider this. What is there about this that would have other people stand in long lines and pay $100 for a ticket when I can't see any value in it? How does that work? So the inquiry into the truth of the matter rather than defending our judgment about it. So the trouble with change is it invites us to look at ourselves and to reevaluate things that often we don't want to have to reevaluate. So I've got that figured out. Let's leave that one alone. I don't want to have to consider changing that idea. And therefore, I'm going to defend it. My father was a racist. And I've talked about this before. So he could have begun to change his racist point of view, but he didn't. So what he did was Leslie Uggams, who was a really fine black singer, he said, no, she's different. So he made exceptions for the black people that he liked, rather than saying, if she's decent and she's good and I like her, maybe I need to breathe. No, there's no, she's an exception to the rule. And the rule is all of these people are no good except the ones I choose to be good. Isn't that interesting how you can compartmentalize that? And I bring that up not because it has particular value in that particular story, but because we all do this in different areas. And I love jazz, and people say, I don't like jazz. Have you ever listened to this? Oh yeah, I like that. That's jazz. That's soft jazz. That's easy jazz. That's what I call introduction to jazz. Oh, well, I like that, but they write it off completely. I don't like it. That's just it. And I'm safe and comfortable. So I think change jeopardizes our false sense of security and well-being. And I say false because we're not as safe as we think we are. In fact, we're even less safe when we're judgmental, when we refuse to allow the world to be as large as it actually is, for us to embrace the world rather than run from it. We make our world smaller because of our fear of change rather than making it larger.
And our world is changing rapidly in so many ways. So that's why we thought this talk was important. We don't like change. We get used to the way things are. We're comfortable doing things the way we're used to and having things stay the same. And yet change is inevitable, and it is happening rapidly in our world today. And we have to adjust. We have to be more flexible. We have to recognize the oneness of humankind in all of this change, and knowing that all are our brothers and sisters, and that all is well, that we're not threatened, although we seem threatened sometimes, especially with our planet right now. And we have to know that's a change, and we need to participate in that change and make it as workable as possible, with doing what we can to help with the climate change, particularly.
You know, one of the best examples I can think of for myself was about 6, 7 years ago. I had every year or two I update Photoshop, and by updating Photoshop, that means I have the latest version of it. And I put off updating the latest version about 5 years ago for about a year. And the reason I put it off with it was, as soon as I opened up the new version of it, there was a host of things I didn't know, and I would have to learn all over again. And I was scared that I wasn't going to be able to learn those things, so I held on to the old one. Well, I finally got up the courage to download the new one, and I began to walk through the frustration of, I don't know this one, they've changed that, they've changed this. But I also walked into a whole new world of possibilities that I hadn't seen before because they didn't exist in the earlier version. And I think there's a perfect example of life where, when we give up our version of the world that's safe for us and allow ourselves to invest in a larger version of the world, a larger picture of the world with more tools and more devices and more things. It's scary because we feel awkward and uncomfortable and unsure. And it's exciting because as we develop skills and as we develop mastery, we open up another world for ourselves. So what I would say in the face of change is, I invite my world to get bigger. I invite my world to be richer. I invite all that is good that I do not know to be available to me. And I'm available to learn whatever I need to learn in order to have mastery and joy and satisfaction in what I do. If I can say those things in the face of change, I'm inviting it rather than defending against it.
Exactly. And I know I have a love-hate relationship with learning things on the computer. You know, it learning things and programs and how they work. And it can be very frustrating because you usually have no tutorial. You just have to figure it out. But it is so rewarding when you can do so much more, when you know how the programs work and how to get things done. And I feel very fortunate compared to other people my age and my siblings and whatnot who don't even do the computer, and I think, wow, there's so many things they cannot do because they won't have and learn and stay up to date with computers. So I think it's good for our brains, it's good for our connection, it's good for staying up to date, and we deal with the frustration of the change and learning new things.
Well, some other research has been done also indicates that survival of the human species, if we look at it in relationship to other species of animals and their survival, is based on flexibility and adaptability. And so you have to be curious, you have to be willing to be flexible and adapt. And so when somebody says, are you on the computer? No, I haven't adapted to that. I haven't included that. That's not something I do. It's not in, okay, so then that's a whole world that's not available to you, except it's going to be in your life whether you want it there or not. So our ability to embrace change is one of the ways in which we can survive and thrive. Our inability to embrace change limits us in our skills and in our life, and it limits actually even our longevity, which is really interesting.
Mhm.
So what I would say to you, to think about is that if change seems to be traumatic for you, then ask yourself, is there an earlier trauma that I've not paid attention to that I need to give attention to? And can I take care of that? Or must I take the past traumas that I've had and project them onto the present and then live them again and again and again 1,000 times? And if we do that, unfortunately, we can be done in by past trauma because we keep reinventing it without meaning to. I know that's simplistic and there's some work that can get done, but ask yourself the question, whenever you're faced with a change, have I ever dealt with change before and have I been successful? And why do I think that I can't be successful in this? And why do I think that I won't actually come out richer and better because I've embraced it?
And by knowing that I'm just part of the whole, this whole thing is the life of God. And so if we realize we're one with that and we're participating in it, it's not us against anybody or anything, but us with
Mhm.
everyone and everything.
That's absolutely wonderful. And so I hope this is useful for folks that are living in this world today, because if you're alive in this world today, change is upon you. Change is everywhere. Everything changes. We're blessed to live in an area where there's no climate issues. We don't have heavy snow and we don't have all of that. So instead of that, we have a highway department that tears up the roads regularly and blocks them off so that you can't use them. And we have lots of ways in which we can find ourselves having our lives impeded upon by pressures that we hadn't thought of or we didn't like. But it's really interesting.
So I think it's time now to invite others to participate in supporting this ministry. Let's see, we do that with screen share.
We sure
don't
do.
we? Yes. So I
Go to
think
share.
this is it. Okay. Mhm.
Let's make this bigger. Okay, go ahead. Say what you want to say.
So we invite you to support this ministry with your financial support. And we know many of you do that and have it set up regular for your regular giving. And we really appreciate that. But I invite others who would like to share, tell you how you do this. You go to our website, which is cslpalmbeaches.org, and click on the ways to donate button, which I just lost. Here, ways to donate. And that would take you to ways to donate. And so we appreciate your giving, and we have an affirmation. Where's our affirmation? I think I clicked on the wrong thing. Stop that share.
Let's just get a stop for share.
I did.